We move to the end of the 19th century, the capital of a distant southern country, Buenos Aires. Spanish speech, another continent, another history. But once you raise your head, you feel uneasy. Enormous buildings in the same imperial style. Heavy columns, perfectly calculated cornices, arched windows several stories tall. Every building is like a palace, every block like a museum. It feels as if the city was built not by poor settlers and not by chaotic developers, but by a single very strict authority following precise blueprints. Now mentally pull away from South America and find yourself on the other side of the world. Kyiv, the center of Eastern Europe. A completely different history, different wars, different rulers. But the stone speaks the same language, the same proportions, the same portals, the same facades. Only the signs change, written in another alphabet. From there, another leap, a North American industrial city, then a German trade center, and again the same repetition. Streets in different countries that look as if they were assembled from the same architectural catalog. For years, we were taught that every nation followed its own path, that some lived for centuries in the steppes, others in the mountains, still others in the jungle, that styles arose from within cultures, reflecting their soul and traditions. But these stone giants couldn't care less about textbooks. They seemed displayed on purpose to pose one uncomfortable question. How is it that cities on opposite ends of the earth are dressed in the same stone skin? Who imposed a single architectural code on the planet? The official version tries to soften this with pretty words. Fashion, European influence, borrowings. But then we must accept another oddity. To copy construction of this level, one must possess the same technologies, the same engineering school, the same resources. This is not a hut or a shed. These are monumental complexes with precise geometry, perfect symmetry, and complex stonework. How did not only the facades cross the oceans, but also the skills needed to build them? And the more closely you look, the stronger the feeling becomes that we are not looking at traces of influence, but at the remnants of a single project. As if at some moment on Earth, there existed one center, one commissioner, one construction standard, a power that didn't care what language the inhabitants beneath its buildings spoke. It simply covered the planet with a network of stone hubs, capitals, ports, nodal cities, all built in one style and one scale. We are used to treating these buildings as old, beautiful architecture, a background for photographs and strolls. But if you strip away habit, only the bare fact remains. The world is studded with identical palaces twins, which official history tries to cut apart and assign to different nations as their own small legends. Meanwhile, the stone stubbornly whispers the opposite, and that is only the top layer. Step closer, look at the doors, the windows, the walls, and it becomes clear that the problem is not only in the style. The problem is, for whom was this stone world built? The longer you look at these beautiful old houses, the stronger the feeling grows that we were never expected there at all. You approach the main entrance. It is not a door, it is a gate. Twice, even 3 times human height. Massive leaves, thick wood, metal. The handle is so high a child cannot reach it. To push such weight, an adult must lean their whole body into it. For everyday life, this is not merely inconvenient. It is illogical. A little to the side, windows. They begin where our second floor normally starts. Their lower edges are so high that a person cannot comfortably look outside. The upper edges disappear somewhere in the darkness under a ceiling that is not even visible. This is not a window to look out of. This is an opening designed for a hall so tall that our height becomes a statistical error. Inside such buildings, the benches, partitions, and suspended ceilings appeared much later. Originally, these were enormous empty spaces, where a person of our size is lost like an insect. The walls are assembled from blocks so large that even 3 people cannot wrap their arms around one. Each stone is the size of a small car in mass and dimensions. The columns by the entrances are several times thicker than an adult human, and there are not 1 or 2 such columns, but entire rows. If you honestly ask yourself, for whom was all this designed? The answer, for us, suddenly becomes unconvincing. Everything is too large, too much excess space, too much overcapacity in every detail. And then a forgotten detail from old chronicles surfaces. Patagonia. The southern part of that same Argentina, which for centuries appeared in maritime journals as the land of giants. Travelers wrote about local inhabitants who were noticeably taller than Europeans. Old photographs exist where ordinary colonists stand next to people almost 1.5 times taller. Not legend, not myth, but real faces, heights, bodies. If you connect one with the other, the puzzle begins assembling itself. Giant doors we must stretch to reach, ceilings under which you could build another house, windows we cannot look through, only squint at from below, stone raised to heights we could not lift even with today's machinery, and at the same time, old accounts of people of completely different stature, for whom such architecture would not have seemed grandiose, but simply normal and comfortable. Then our position in these cities shifts. We cease to be the owners who supposedly built all of this. We become tenants who have moved into someone else's rooms, those who hung wires on the walls, cut small human-sized doors into giant ones, erected partitions in enormous halls, and declared all of it their history. Stone, however, remembers the original scale far better than any textbook. Now let's look at the most recognizable buildings on the planet, temples and cathedrals. We are told these are houses of worship, spiritual centers. But if you remove the words from your mind and simply analyze the structure like a machine, the picture changes. At the center almost always stands a dome. From the outside it is beautiful. Inside it is empty. But in shape it is a perfect resonator. And if you examine old drawings and descriptions, you often find that inside the domes there was a metal frame or cladding. Metal plus shape equals a ready amplifier of any energy entering it. Next, spires and bell towers. These thin needles pointing at the sky, officially built to be closer to God and to hang bells. But physics says something else. They are ideal antennas, tall, thin, raised as high as possible. At the top, complex metal crosses, sometimes with multiple bars, circles, added elements. All of this suspiciously resembles not decorations, but intricate contacts and discharge devices. Look at the rose windows on facades, not just colored glass, but complex circular patterns with repeating geometry. Light, passing through such patterns, is split and transformed. Inside, where the acoustics are perfect, every whisper becomes a pure, amplified sound. The walls, columns, arches, all are arranged to guide, reflect, and amplify waves. Instead of a house of prayer, you begin to see the shell of a complex device where every detail has its function. From this emerges an uncomfortable but logical hypothesis. These structures may not have been spiritual centers at all, but energy stations. They could collect, store, and redistribute energy from the environment. Call it ether, atmospheric electricity, the Earth's field, whatever. What matters is that their external religious appearance can easily be added later, like a theatrical set. Icons, altars, benches, partitions, all of it could be brought in after the building ceased to function as originally intended. The contrast with our modern buildings is striking. We construct simple rectangular boxes of brick and concrete. Straight walls, low ceilings, small doors scaled to us. Everything is clear. Shelter from cold and rain. No extra shapes. No mysterious structures on the roof. And next to them stands a cathedral, where every curve and protrusion seems calculated to take part in some complex process. The gap in levels of thinking and technology is so glaring that the phrase, "It's just old beauty," begins to sound like a convenient excuse. Old photographs from the late 19th century reveal another oddity rarely discussed. On the streets of Bucharest, Buenos Aires, American and European cities, we see neat streetcars. They glide quietly along rails, but above them there are no wires. None of the overhead web we see today. The cars move, the lamps shine, the windows glow, yet the energy source is seemingly absent. Nearby we find pictures of early electric cars, and even something resembling electric scooters. For the late 19th century, this did not look like an experiment, but an ordinary part of city life. A little time passes. The first decades of the 20th century arrive, and now the same streets, the same neighborhoods. But the photos show a completely different world. Roads turned into thick mud. The entire surface is crowded with horses, carts, wagons. No wireless trams, no neat electric carriages. At best, primitive, early gasoline cars, smoky and noisy. Clean, silent transport was replaced within a few years by the most primitive traction. Historians must explain this as natural development. They claim electricity was inconvenient, expensive, complicated. But the strangest part is something else. A society that had already learned to use electric motors widely suddenly rolls back to horses and mud. This doesn't look like progress. It looks like a forced shutdown, as if someone cut off the old energy source at once, made previous technology useless, and forced cities to use whatever crude alternatives they could manage on their own. If we allow the possibility that temples and imperial buildings were indeed nodes of a unified energy network, the picture becomes chillingly clear. The network was turned off. The source of free, wireless energy was cut. What had worked from the air turned into dead metal. Streetcars stalled. Power lines disappeared not because they never existed, but because they were invisible, unlike our wired systems. People had to urgently switch to what could be organized from scratch: horses, coal, oil. Technologies easy to control, measure, and sell. But shutting down the old system wasn't enough. It was necessary to convince all future generations that no such advanced network ever existed. That all this magnificence was the work of their almost identical ancestors with saws and horses. For this, another step was required, one rarely mentioned aloud: rewriting the history of construction. In photographs of great 19th century construction projects, we see the same pattern over and over. The building already stands. Columns in place, arches assembled, dome raised. Wooden scaffolding is attached to the facade. Workers climb it, paint, plaster, pose. We are told, here is proof that they built it. Yet the most difficult and crucial stage, from the foundation pit to installing multi-ton blocks, is never shown. The story begins only at the finishing stage. The most unpleasant part begins when we look not only upward at facades, but downward under our feet. In old districts worldwide, the same strange feature repeats. The first floor is buried in the ground. Windows are half covered with earth, lower door arches cut off by today's sidewalk. What we are told are basements have full-sized windows with grates and even traces of old entrances, as if once the ground level was 1 or even 2 floors lower, and someone simply dumped a layer of soil on top and called it a cultural layer. There are not 1 or 2 such houses. Whole streets, whole neighborhoods in different countries have sunken first floors. If we believe the explanation about accumulated garbage and construction debris, it looks strange. Garbage does not evenly cover entire cities. But the theory of a global mud flood suddenly finds visual support here. As if at some moment enormous territories were covered with a mixture of water and soil. Cities were partially buried, and survivors simply cleared the upper levels and settled what remained above the surface. If we take this as a working hypothesis, another line opens. The old imperial buildings with giant doors and domes were not built by us. They are surviving fragments of someone else's world that was washed away. Mud buried the lower tiers, erased all small structures, and only the strongest constructions remained. When the layer settled, new populations were brought to these cleared platforms. People of our height, our technology level, with our tasks. They were given a new story. You and your ancestors built all this. Then the explosive diversity of peoples and appearances becomes more understandable. The official theory about one root for all looks fragile compared to how drastically races and types differ. Such divergence would require enormous timescales of isolation, which we are not given. But within the logic of resettlement, everything falls into place. Different groups of people could have been brought to different regions with already predefined characteristics, some to one climate and ready-made cities, others to another. This makes control easier, division easier, and conflict easier if needed. It turns out we live in a world we did not build. We walk through streets laid long before us. We warm ourselves in houses whose walls were designed for different loads and different purposes. We pray in buildings that may have been the heart of an energy network. We argue about which nation is great, sitting inside identical stone boxes built by someone long before any of our nations existed. All that remained for those who restarted the system was to rewrite the legend skillfully, to turn the ruins of a high civilization into old architecture, the mud flood into a cultural layer, and us into people sincerely convinced that this theatrical city around us has been their home from the very beginning.